Hello and welcome to episode 280 of the THERSday Night Podcast. My name's Brady, joined as always by David, and special guest for the first time in video form, 24/7 Sports' Ben Moore, publisher of PantherTalk, who we watch recruiting stuff. When signing day happens, as football signing day was today, we have to defer to people who are doing a little bit more of the in-depth stuff and working these phones, figuring stuff out. Going to talk basketball later, because we have contractually obligated to talk basketball as well. I don't know if Ben is going to dip out before that happens or not. Probably for the best if he does, for his own sake. We'll get to the rest of the pod. But welcome to the video version of THERSday Night Podcast. And what's the phrase? The trotted out phrase about signing day?
What would the unbound bind themselves to your university? Is that from the great book?
Yeah, something like that.
We put on there? Yeah. I probably butchered it, and Bud will probably shoot me a message a little bit later. But no, the time has come for the parade of the committed to officially bind themselves to the university. There we go. That's his quote.
There it is.
Often used. Shout out to Bud.
It's a good day. There was even some surprise news which we will get to, but I think the day most recently before now that this staff and Del McGee has exceeded expectations was the last time we were at this spot, which speaks to things haven't gone well. And so I don't want this to turn into like we think this is going to save everything, because there's a lot to be proven with this staff and its ability to turn out wins. And as part of that, you look at 24/7's rankings. Georgia State's currently 7th. Bit movable, if a guy gets rated here or there, maybe that moves up. But the point is, this isn't currently like last year where it is like top of the Sun Belt, among one of the better of the G5s rated. And so there was good work done, and we'll get into it. We'll pull up the list of the recruits, but a good way to start the conversation as far as we aren't trying to sell you as this coaching staff is going to have to do it with on the field stuff. And this is just a nice, this is kind of how you get there. This is how you roster build. Obviously, they haven't abandoned high school, but this isn't going to be the pod where we kind of gloss over the 1-11 and the 4-20 at this point. These are the days that when you hired Del McGee, you hoped he would have good days, and this was another one of them.
No question. 20 guys announced basically today overall. You had a couple guys that were gray shirts as well, guys that basically were committed previously and then are going to come and enroll early. I'm very interested to see how many of these guys are enrolling early. I've been told quite a bit are headed in. But the biggest thing ultimately, there was certainly positions that were addressed immediately. I mean, the defensive line jumps out, smacks you in the face with so many bodies basically thrown at their defensive back as well. We just saw the run early part of this week with 3 key guys hitting the portal, or announcing they're going to hit the portal. But to your point, I mean, this is what Del McGee was brought in to do, and what he has cut his teeth for years and years is being an elite recruiter. And had an opportunity basically to take some guys from other schools. He had some other guys that probably he wanted that went elsewhere. But part of it too is you mentioned not being as high as last year. You're selling a lot of hope coming out of year one to that class in the 2025 cycle. The tough part about it ultimately, and I had this repeated to me a few times in the last week or two, 1-11 gets you at some point, right? You having a terrible season, these kids start looking around. Like you had a quarterback commit, Bronson Chafin, who ends up signing with App State, partly because he's looking around and going, all right, there may be a quicker path to the field potentially there, but also they're right now better spot than you are. There are other guys that flipped and went elsewhere, but for the most part, guys that were committed stuck on board and stayed. And I think that's again a tribute to Del and his staff and kind of their staying power. And not a huge amount of surprises today, but some. And more important to me as a guy who's always banged the drum for Metro Atlanta kids, or even state of Georgia kids. You went and got some kids from some high school football factories, in the state of Georgia today. So that's a big thing, trying to sell the brand and better the brand. And at the top of the list, basically, you've got, 11 of your 15, 16 guys that were brought in from the state of Georgia, which is what I've begged for forever.
Yeah, I've got the list pulled up here if you're watching on YouTube or on Spotify, because there's video there as well. This is from Georgia State's site, so it's organized. Starts with the incoming freshmen. Obviously, we'll get to the bottom of it where it's the guys you're bringing in from D2 or JUCO that you might see a little earlier, but Malik Harrell, DB from Lakewood High School in St. Petersburg, Florida. Kadorian Benjamin, outside offensive lineman from Swainsboro. Kenneth Morgan III, a tight end from Tampa Catholic in Bradenton, Florida. Running back Xavier Butler from Lithonia. Jamel Lundy, I want to make sure I'm saying that right, from Valdosta, one of those powerhouses that Ben was just talking about, Valdosta, Georgia. Aaron Moore, defensive end from Mobile, Alabama.
No relation.
Just Chevalo Holmes and Mike Holmes then. Keeping it going. Kicker Balint Vorish Marty from Roswell.
Does that say 5'6"?
What's his leg? That's what you care about there.
He's very short, but he may be one of the best kickers in the country. Like,
I'm curious about that.
That was the one guy where I heard more reverb of like, if we can keep this guy, because the thing that I kept hearing over and over again as well was, when's the last time you heard that a kicker has swag like literally an edge, and this dude does. He's hit multiple walk-offs this year for Roswell, who was a really good football team. And you're looking at it, you're going, I'm loading up and I'm going, yeah, I can't think of that way. But he has the attitude of, put me in this situation and I'm going to knock this thing down whenever, wherever.
Yeah, that'll be music to Panther fans' ears, surely, the way that the kicking went this year. Weird to kind of put your hopes on a true freshman, but kind of feels like that's the spot you're going to be in, the way it went this season. So it also speaks to a certain level of where things are at when you were like amped about the kicker in the signing class. But again, we are fully aware what the weaknesses of this team were, and among them was consistency in the kicking game, which we even saw into the season finale. So not an unimportant one to highlight there. And then this was another one of the surprises today. From Spruce Creek High School in Port Orange, Florida, Freddie Wilson, who until very recently was a Georgia Tech commit. High 3-star per 247. So, guy who final day, or the first day of signing day at least, there's an opportunity there. Guy that, and we saw with Jartavius Flournoy goes into the portal. He's one of the guys you mentioned. I think we'll hit that at some point. Maybe should have hit that at the start, but there's a defensive tackle sliding right in there if you're losing that guy to the portal.
100%. And I think, too, you add him with Zamar McGee, who's more, kind of that nose tackle specifically. Like, I think Wilson can play inside and outside, and we were talking before, we jumped on here as well. You have enough defensive linemen now. You could go to an even front if you want. Like, you legitimately do.
If you happen to be switching up the defensive scheme for some reason.
For some reason. If there happens to be any changes on the defensive side of the ball, which we are anticipating, yes.
Moving down the list the rest of the way, Zach Stairs, a 6'1" receiver from Riverwood in Atlanta, so another one of those Georgia-Atlanta guys you mentioned. Montarius Eccles, who was in last year's class, that held over, ended up signing today. So I don't know if you immediately put that on like he's a, quote, true freshman, but maybe you expect him to be a little ahead of schedule. But whatever it is, you like to see these things where it's like a guy doesn't sign and then he gray shirts, but then like that isn't just like words on a page. Like he ends up still signing. Like he committed and the staff stayed true to him and honored that with him, and he is signing. So I like seeing those because those can be some of the worst stories in college football and stuff like that. Doesn't happen.
Agreed. And a lot of times too, there's a variety of different reasons guys gray shirts. Sometimes it's development. Sometimes it's, hey, there's just not a ton of guys on the on the depth chart. Sometimes it's an injury. For this specific kid too, is you had basically some of his teammates come, and he basically kind of got left out, and I'll come back. But he was given the workout plans and things like that to basically be ready to rock and roll once he shows up in January, and we'll go through winter workouts and spring practice, and very interested to see what he looks like.
And then, correct me if I'm wrong, Josiah Pope, inside linebacker from Hiram, is the same case, was another gray shirt.
100%. He was actually committed to Yale, and I can say this unequivocally, it is very, very difficult to flip kids that are going to Ivy Leagues because ultimately they're looking past the 4 years, right? It's a 40-year decision with them. He decided to basically take a gray shirt, stay here in the state. Have an opportunity, as we've talked about before too. Linebacker position, there's some reps available, and interested to see what he looks like in the spring as well.
Yeah, and I mean they're in the playoff now, so it's harder to recruit against Yale because they're winning games. They just erased a huge. I don't know if you saw that. They're down huge at Youngstown at halftime and came back and won that game.
Unbelievable
on the field.
Unbelievable comeback. Yeah, it was awesome.
Rolling through the rest of these high school signees, Rasheed Fuller from Colquitt, familiar name for Georgia State. They've gone to Colquitt down to Moultrie quite a few times over the history. He's a 5'9" DB, cornerback. Timothy Daly, defensive end from Paulding County in Dallas, Georgia. Khalid Feliz, a 6'3" outside linebacker from Lake Nona High School in Orlando, Florida. And then the one you mentioned to close it out, Zamar McGee from Carver, Columbus. Formerly the place where Del McGee was the high school head coach.
And playing for Dell's former basically player in Jarvis Jones down there at Carver. So got a chance to see them live this year. Carver Columbus looks like a college team, and Josiah Creedle also is assistant coach down there, former Panther. I talked to Stretch in week 1, and he said I believe they had 9 kids that were 300 plus on that team. They did not look like a basically double-A high school team, and they are absolutely favored again to win the state championship. And I expect them to do it. And good luck to Zebo and Stretch and the rest of the Carver Columbus crew.
And I guess, I don't know if anyone we didn't specifically highlight that stands out to you, having seen this class get assembled maybe a little up close, and also just how this pairs with last year's class, because it was a bigger class. You hope a lot of them stick around. I guess you don't know yet, but it does feel like part 2 of the project, and it's hard to think about it that way when you're on this signing day and there's a lot of new faces to learn, and you want to see them right away because they're new names, but it is ultimately about a larger project that you started in a big way last season as well.
No question. Because again, we saw so many freshmen. We outlined it all throughout the season about how many guys got an opportunity to play and saw the field. You hope that pays dividends in year 2. That also, you want these guys to say, look, you did this in year 1. Year 2 should be better. You should see the jump. You're used to college football now. You can go into the off season, kind of refine some things, add some things. We standout performances and things that way, which should be attractive as well to this class. And I think that part did pay off dividends, going and grabbing guys. I think, again, a guy like Kadorian Benjamin, there were big guys coming running at him really, really late. That was the guy that I had circled and said, hey, watch him just in case somebody comes running in, because he's got great size at 6'5", 310, 315, that neighborhood. Again, rebuilding the defensive line. I like KJ Morgan a lot, the tight end out of Tampa Catholic. He is huge. He plays power forward for his basketball team. Super athletic, big hands. And as we've seen, Dell will play, freshman tight ends and play early, as we've seen that in the last couple of years as well. So, and we've had successful tight ends here for quite some time, and actually had a chance to talk to KJ on his official visit. But he was in the stands for a home game, and we talked about just what that tight end position looked like and what he had kind of envisioned and what had been kind of mapped out for him. So excited to see those guys once they arrive and see what they turn into and how many opportunities they're going to get on the field.
We can turn this into a little bit of a sandwich spot as far as mentioned. Artavius is in the portal. That one came out today. We've gotten the news of the beginnings of the roster turnover that's going to happen, and we got it in win bang boom, 3 cornerbacks right out of the gate. Bernard Kazi, Shams John, and Deuce Fillmore all on the first day, basically after the season, all put their name in the portal. You're not starting over entirely at DB, but cornerback, but you're not starting over. That's a pretty big loss there, and so it puts into focus. You're bringing in guys now, and probably when the portal opens January, to play some cornerback. Started that project a bit. You bring in Braylon Alexander from Washburn, and originally at Lanier, from Atlanta, Georgia. Originally, he's a senior, so he's got a lot of experience there at Washburn. Which is that Division II? I'm always a little bit iffy on the classifications of some of these places.
Your guess is as good as mine. I'm going to go to the Google right now and find out. try to.
This one escapes the mascot, the mascot repository we have.
they are Division II.
Okay, there you go.
In Topeka, Kansas, in case you were wondering.
Yeah, that's also part of it. It's not a local place. Like, I'm familiar enough with Wingate, which is another school we'll get to, that it's that's Division II, but Kansas. But there's a lot of experience there. I don't know what else there's there. Looking at it right now, any cornerback, any defensive back looks good because you just lost quite a handful. But then you added a couple of. I'll skip around here a bit. You added a couple of teammates from Wingate. You have Ryan Green, who led Wingate with 82 tackles this past season. He's a redshirt senior, and then Manju Berthe, who's also come in from Wingate. Both of them were teammates there, and both of them came from Shiloh High School in Georgia, so this is a homecoming for them. He had 12.5 tackles for loss, 5 sacks as well for the Bulldogs. So a little bit of a continuity there coming in all of a sudden from Wingate to Georgia State by way of Shiloh originally.
Yeah, and teammates of offensive lineman Forleski Martin, too. So they both probably come recommended, seen the chatter on social media, hearkening back to their spring practice days going against each other. So that should be pretty fun.
And then rounding out the rest of the guys we know for now, we should say signing day is still open for a couple of days. So if anything else comes across, will be after this podcast is recorded. But there are still 2 days until dead period. Then January comes around and everything goes crazy. But Tyrese Cathy is a defensive tackle from Northeast Mississippi Community College. So dipping back into the Mississippi JUCOs for this staff. And Corey Walker, a DB from Riverdale, went to Georgia Military College, so another junior college guy coming in. Peter Diaz, and I've done this now twice with the OL. Offensive lineman, I believe, a tackle from Shippensburg Division II up in Pennsylvania. And Xavier Esquien, best guess there, who had 11.5 sacks at Savannah State, 13.5 tackles for loss. So they went the lower division here. They added pretty substantially early, but there are some stats there that you can point to. Like, if you're not grinding a bunch of tape to know who these guys were, what they played for, hadn't seen them on your TV, but there's at least stats you can point to with these guys that they're bringing in production. And defensive line, what is that, 10 or 11 guys we've named just from today? Like, completely new room when you factor in outside linebacker as well.
Completely overhauled, and that's you added some experience, you added some talent, you added some size, which is we have talked about is it kind of a Del McGee trait specifically. I was a little surprised they didn't hit the JUCOs a little harder, but several of their targets basically went elsewhere, and we talked about that a little bit earlier. Part of that is the 1-11 as well, right? It's hard to sell that. But again, there, as these guys come in, there'll be other opportunities, for junior college, and it's been interesting too to really even see the transfer portal cycle because, it used to be high school and JUCO kind of paired. This was the time. Basically, this was the only time that you saw the high school early enrollees and then junior college guys come in this in this December time frame. Well, now this has shifted to basically the signing period. Where everyone jumps in and everyone signs and everyone knows what's going on. Now you have, as you mentioned, the transfer portal shifts to January. Now what? Right? Now the guys that aren't enrolling early, what are you looking at there? There's going to be more junior college guys that are available. I was listening to a interview on the way home today where they were talking specifically about the drop ad dates as well, conflicting with the transfer portal. So if you're not in the playoffs, you're trying to get all these official visits and everything thrown in the January semester. How does that work? So, I was expecting a little more JUCO guys to be signed. It's just Wednesday as we cut this, so it could have some more on Thursday and Friday. There's still some targets out there along the offensive line in other places, and wide receiver I think still probably needs to be addressed as well.
Yeah, that was the one area where I was like, I love what we're doing on the defensive end, but there's a pretty big hole that is probably going to be there at wide receiver if, the season started tomorrow. So, hopefully they get some sort of solution there in the coming days, weeks,
Yeah, gotta replace that Hurst fella, yeah.
I will say this, though. it is an opportunity in that I don't know that you need to go out and get a Ted Hurst or like try to replicate him in. You know, this team needs to be more balanced offensively, and so it's going to be interesting branching off point because you have tools. You if you bring in Cameron Brown back, which for now that's all the indications are that they're planning to. He's planning to. You can bank on that going into spring, hopefully. There's a way to build this team that is more built around the run and more balanced offense and isn't requiring you to go get a guy who's going to be, a day 1,000-yard receiver, which gives you options in the transfer portal that you don't have to feel like you're chasing that. And so the other part of it's interesting to follow is just who stays because they did bring a lot of wide receivers in this last receiving class.
Six freshmen right now. Yeah, there's a ton of capital spending.
There could be reps there for guys that are taking the leap. And we saw guys like Kyle Washington look better at the end of the season. DJ Avery basically played the entire year. And so I'd asked Dell about it a couple weeks ago at the press conference, just kind of like how you get those guys to feel like they're growing when they're not getting the catches, because not as an ego thing, but just as far as like wide receivers are used to that being the way they value like how they're doing on the field, and they're not getting that this year because it's just not what their role is. There's a guy that's taking up over 50% of the targets or thereabouts. Yep. And it was interesting to hear him talk about how him and Coach Craig kind of balance that and make sure that they are focused in the right direction. But we'll see who is going into year two. Like, we're just going to have to watch that over the next couple of weeks of where that sticks around. And probably that's also part of why maybe we haven't seen as much there is they don't need to make moves there yet, but they might have to come January just depending on how the roster sits.
It's the same thing with the running back room. Candidly, you ain't got Deuce Butler, and that's really it, And so they're saying, hey, as of right now, that room we feel good about.
I mean, the best thing you can say is you've got the chance to do that because everyone's in the portal together in January.
All swimming in the big ocean. It's going to be unbelievable, man.
It's
having 1,500 names in basically a 2-week span.
That's going to be insane. But I also feel like running back is going to be. How do I couch this? Running back next year is not going to be as important if they don't address some of the other things around it in a way. I think part of the, Brady and I talked about this.
You could have Derrick Henry or one of us back there, and it might not be that different depending on how the offensive line gets better.
Right. Exactly. And I mean, if teams are, not really worried about any sort of wide receiver threat, or we're still, kind of playing too many quarterbacks or something like that, the running back isn't going to matter, so maybe they do, address that in the actual transfer window next month. But for now, I think that's okay. I think they kind of addressed some of the positions that they really needed to, I know every coach says it and it's so cliche, but like genuinely a big problem for Georgia State this year was the trenches, they could not do anything in short yardage on offense. They could not do much in the way of getting a pass rush. And, everybody feels great and thinks they're going to win the national championship on signing day. So we'll see what things look like in 9 months, when it's actually pads on and, it's hot outside.
I'm going to fact check you there and say I don't think there is a single person who's watched Georgia State who thinks they're winning the national championship on signing day. But I do think this is your chance to feel a little bit better just for the time being.
Hey, man, 2-10 is still an improvement. It's not big, but it's still an improvement on 2025.
I think that's where we'll leave the football stuff for now. I think, 24 minutes, hit your entire signing class. Record time as always. We're just running through this stuff. Not sure if Ben wants to stick around. I think we probably call it there, and then we will do our contractually obligated basketball talk. But Ben, as always, thanks for coming on. Appreciate your insight on this signing class. And obviously when it finishes out, when we get into January and they're making all these portal ads and guys are coming off the roster, we'll come back and we'll see how it all shook out.
Absolutely. Just throw it all up and we'll see when the dust settles how it looks, man. Always fun to join you boys.
Our thanks again to Ben, as always, for coming on, talking recruiting with us. More to come. Obviously, if we get more roster news in the next week, we will come back and address it in next week's podcast. But for now, we're going to leave football. No more news to report on that front. Might have more of that as well in the next week. Expecting at some point to hear some news of some changes on the football staff, as we kind of alluded to there and talking with Ben. But we're going to leave football for now. National Signing Day is behind us, and now it is time to talk about, it's our weekly ritual talking about Georgia State men's basketball. They had a little bit of a break there as they ended up closing out Cancun with 2 losses. They lose against Samford by a score of 78-63 back on November 25th. They lose 77-58 to New Mexico State in the next day. So they end up unofficially going 0-3 in the Cancun Challenge, with the first game being against South Dakota State. Come back and play Mercer on the road in Macon on Tuesday night. It's a 46-46 game at the break. They score just 21 points in the second half. They fall 78-67 to the Mercer Bears, as I'm pulling up the stats from that game now. They fall to 1-8 on the season. And I mean, it's a simple thing, you know. I think for a lot of fans who have watched this team, and I know some have already checked out who are listening to this podcast, but these games are still happening. It was a break from the way things had been going in the first half. They scored 46 points, which I felt like I had no idea what I was watching. The way this team had played for the first stretch of games is just like far and away their best start to a game offensively. And even then, it started with being in a 25-9 hole, and it felt like a lot more of the same. But they started hitting a bunch of shots. Ayoba Bertha, I think, had his best game at Georgia State, ends with 13 points. I believe 11 of those were in the first half. And they're making threes. They 5 of 14 in the first half on three-pointers. When the jump shots dried up, so did the offense, and it started to look a lot like what we've seen for most of the season. Mercer didn't shoot it exceptionally well in the second half themselves. They slowed down considerably, but they managed 32%, and that was better than Georgia State. They go 10 of 14 from the line, and that's 5 more free throws than Georgia State made, and stuff like that. As much as they still needed to clean stuff up, they were the team that was able to put it together enough in the second half, as we've seen far too often with this group, where they're sort of second best in the second half far too often. Was the case again on Tuesday.
Yeah, I mean, you get Georgia State offense just gets in these ruts. You know, they just don't put the ball in the basket. And, you know, this game was pretty close. And then they just did that patented, we're not going to score for another,
7 minutes.
7 minutes this time. And it's frustrating because even the, Coach Lanier, Coach Hunter teams, of yesteryear, they had some scoring droughts. Sometimes it would legitimately still get up to like 3, 4, 5 minutes even. But they were still able to come back out of those droughts and put points on the board. Or, and specifically with the Coach Hunter teams, like those guys they would have field goal droughts, but they were getting to the line. They were able to, shoot free throws to kind of get themselves out of it. And, unfortunately, this wasn't a good free throw shooting game for Georgia State. If there's one thing that I can say is not specifically a worry for them, like they're relatively all right at free throws.
When the right guys are taking them, they're like elite. They're still like, that is the one like bright green KenPom stat they have is, as a team, 76.6%, 45th best in the country. But they are also in the bottom 100 in getting to the free throw line, or free throws as a percentage of field goal attempts. Way low. So it's not something they accentuate enough. And that ultimately is a function of the philosophy, and not getting plays drawn up where guys are getting into advantageous, where they're getting a step on a guy and getting to the foul line, especially the guards.
And that is just kind of the problem, like there's no real cohesive offense being run. And I said it, I think I said it after the Presbyterian game, where do the easy plays come from for this team? Far too often, they do not have there's no easy offense. And I will say, and I will give him, some credit. It's not totally a surprise that Ja'Kai Newton has been a lot better. We kind of noticed a couple of games ago, they're like, all right, he's kind of getting his legs underneath him, and he's kind of busting out, some good offense. And, that it's great. He led the team with 18 points, that at least did relatively well against Mercer.
Yeah. 5 of 8 from inside the arc, which they needed a guy to step up and make those shots on the inside. The 2 of 8 from 3 is less good, but I just don't think he's like that type of shooter.
Exactly.
And
he's not.
He's taking a lot of them. It's kind of the same thing with South Tenari Lane. Like, the way this offense is structured, sometimes it's catch and shoot guys who shouldn't be catch and shoot guys, or some of it's guys are throwing up threes because it's the first good look they're getting. The first open guy in a possession is a guy behind the arc and he throws it up. And this team, especially the last couple of weeks, has started to get really dependent on the three. And it worked in the first half, and this one did not work in the second half. Should also mention real quick, go ahead.
I was going to say, I don't think it's worked in any of the other games. I mean, obviously they've lost, but just as a function of offense, it has not worked in any of the other games either.
Yeah, Bertha 3 of 6 in this one, and they're good looks, and they've started to fall. I was talking about it, like, even back to the scrimmage, the open practice they held. He was not making them in that. He was not making them a ton early in the season, but they were nice catch and shoot looks. They were the right shots, and they're starting to fall now, and he got into a nice rhythm there in the first half. Got into foul trouble as well and ultimately fouled out in 19 minutes. Not necessarily what you want to see, but he did his role in this game on Tuesday. He made his shots. He was efficient, 5 of 10, 3 of 6 from 3, 13 points. Like, coming off the bench like that, that's what you're looking for. In this one, should note, no Jelani Hamilton. He was pictured going through warm-ups, but then back in street clothes for the game. He missed both of the games in Cancun after playing against South Dakota State. So, close, I think it'd be fair to say, though nothing concrete on that. So, short-handed, so to speak, but they did get Anthony Eno back, who missed the games in Cancun. Ja'Kai Newton missed against New Mexico State, so he was back in this one. And so, basically as close to full health as you're going to get without your leading scorer. So, that's kind of out the window as far as things you can control. And I still maintain, like, the best gift Jonas Hayes has gotten this program is that there will be an opportunity for the next coach to retain Micah Tucker and Chris Jones. So I think Micah, to a certainly a larger degree, but even the spurts you've seen from Chris, and you saw it in this game, he played 11 minutes and kind of showed up in a couple of different spots. Real encouraging play from your freshman, and I think you've really started to see Micah blossom. You know, we have given absolutely no time to the games in Cancun because partly in between pods, partly just, you know, you get it. But you 15 points against New Mexico State, and then against Stanford, he was the guy. He's 21 points. He was 6 of 15, but 6 of 11 inside the arcs, 9 and 11 on free throws. He is one of those guys that is helping your free throw numbers considerably. He's at 89% on the season. Doing a lot of growing up in a hurry, and that is something that I don't think there's any way to spin this season around, and it's going to get worse this Saturday. You're going and playing a Kennesaw State team who runs a tempo that's going to be hard to keep up with and has swept the series since it's resumed to date and is a better team than this Georgia State team right now considerably. And so there's no light coming on this tunnel anytime soon. But that is something that down the line, if they're retained, if the next staff sees the same things in them and wants to develop them, finally you found a freshman class that can play a role for you. And I think I said from like the Georgia exhibition, I was like, Micah Tucker's got something. I wasn't prepared for him being kind of one of the focal points of this team a month in. Like, I don't think that is all about this is a flawed team that is not particularly well put together. I think a lot of it is that he has made that step right away as a true freshman.
Yeah, I mean, certainly a team with flaws, but at some point some guys are just going to play their way on, and you're absolutely correct that Tucker has played his way on. So
not sure, you know, again, you might have to frame that 46-point half because we haven't seen a lot of those. Got momentum in the game, which, again, they haven't been a team that's been able to stack a bunch of momentum together where they were down 16, and this could have been like the worst. This could have been South Dakota State territory, and they turned it around. And I think the players deserve credit for that. They're still fighting. You know, they're still going out there trying. I just think is the common thread we've talked about with this team. They're just not being served particularly well. They're not getting set up to succeed. And the one other thing I wanted to note from this game that just kind of epitomizes what we've been talking about all this time, it was a 70-63 Mercer lead into the final media timeout, or into timeout with about 4 minutes left. They'd kind of given up the lead. It was back and forth in the second half, but Mercer was up 7, and this was the moment you needed something. You're out of a timeout. You have the ball. It's the first time all game Mercer showed any full court pressure, And it was perfectly timed because you had Ayuba Bertha and Joey Chappelle taking the ball up the court. And it's not the first time this season you have had multiple non-ball handlers basically tasked with taking the ball up the court in what turned out to be against pressure. Unsurprisingly, it did not go well. It leads to a turnover, leads to Mercer going to the line and shooting free throws, extending their lead. And it never got closer than that at that point. And it's kind of like, how out of a timeout are you setting them up if it's unprepared for? It was a good time to go to the pressure because Georgia State wasn't expecting it. And I was a bit surprised we didn't see it earlier because it's been the most effective thing anyone has done defensively against this team all season. But, like, how are you caught flat-footed there where those are the guys that you're tasking with taking the ball up the court? Because they do things well, but that is not what you brought them in here to do. And it's just a perfect example of just the inability to use the talent you have in the correct ways, put them in the right space on the court, use them for the roles that they are suited for. And it cost them in a pretty dear moment where you get a 3 in that spot, cut it to 4, maybe you're talking about a different end game, but it just shaped up the end game to play out the way that the kind of the second half, I don't want to call it a collapse, but for lack of a better word, collapse, that was kind of going on there down the stretch, kind of put a stop to any hopes you had at turning it around. So we keep having these kind of fitting moments crop up, and I just wanted to single out again as just far as like, this is what we were talking about when we just don't see any path forward for this team under this coaching staff. It just, these things keep happening.
I mean, that's the thing. Like, they're 1-8, and the record is what it is. But like, all 8 have had the same problems. You know, like, and I'm not saying like, you know, oh, the podcast is like an entertainment vehicle, because no, that's not necessarily the case. But it's like, there's only so many ways that we can say the same issues when the same issues are cropping up. You know, like, do you want to talk about the turnovers? Yeah, Georgia State had too many of them. You know, do you want to talk about the fouls? Yeah, they had way too many fouls as well.
Again, it was a Jekyll and Hyde thing. They had 14 turnovers, 11 of them in the second half. It wasn't an issue in the first half, and then like out of the gate in the second half, they had 3 in the first 3 minutes. Some of them just kind of the sloppy variety, and some of it, as I think has been pointed out on social media, people are noticing. It's like, if the plays you're running are getting predictable, that's when you start having turnovers, because you have opponents start playing to those tendencies and jumping passing lanes and going where the ball is going to go, because that's where it has always gone when you run that play. It's just about, like, basketball is the clearest sport where like the hands-on coaching and the plays being called matter so much. Football, you can skate around it on talent, and you know, there's so much in the air as far as the game within the game there, as far as the plays you're calling as a defensive or offensive coordinator. Baseball, managers are there mostly for vibes and just like setting the lineup. Basketball, it matters so much that your coaches are getting you in the right sets, doing the film work, getting you ready, taking advantage of something you do well, the other team doesn't do well. And we've just seen so many times where it's the other coach that has got a better handle on that stuff than Jonas Hayes and his staff do. It's just reality at this point. And you're talking about being entertaining. I don't know how many, like, I don't think there's 1-8 teams out there that, like, any of them are particularly entertaining brand of basketball, but the last year's couple of teams, it wasn't until, like, middle of conference play that team got really fun offensively. The rest of the season, it was a slog. You know, they get, like, blown out at home against Charlotte. In non-con, there's a lot of those games. You know, they blow the game against Jacksonville State on the road, who's coming up on the schedule this year at home. And it's just kind of like the offense disappears for a long stretch like it did in this one. Like, we've just seen it a lot of ways, and it's seeing the same thing over and over is also what makes people who are listening to this pod, who are learning about this game for the first time, because they didn't tune in, because they knew it was going to happen. And that is the worst thing you can say is the worst thing you can say is they're 1-8. But the second worst thing you can say is it's just not interesting, and it's not compelling, and it's not making people want to clear their schedule to watch. And that is what this team was when they had Ron Hunter here, when they had R.J. Hunter, those teams cooking, when they had DeMarcus Simons and that group cooking. Like, it was a barrel of fun, even if it was one of those nights where they're giving up 50% on three-pointers and losing the game. They're still having fun, and those games were fewer and far between than they are now. But even in those situations, they had a brand of basketball that you didn't go into the game expecting the exact thing you had seen the game before and the level of effort and all that.
Yeah, I mean, could you imagine talking to your 2018 self and being like, yeah, people are checked out of Georgia State basketball, and we're not even a full week into December?
Yeah, like, we're aged enough that you could believe that on football. It's like, I don't think we expected a 1-11 drop-off, and kind of the way this first two seasons has gone, especially with what we saw as the pros of the Del McGee hire. But you were there for a one-win season. I was there for multiple one-win seasons and a winless season for football. Like, that wasn't easy enough to say. Like, they're still building to do there. The building had basically been done with basketball. It is the old adage of, like, you're only as good as your next hire. And I think, did we get lulled into a false sense of belief that, like, that was true, like, that was no longer true for Georgia State and that they were hire-proof? I don't know, maybe. But clearly it's not worked out, and it has dropped a major step from where it was even 5 years ago. And I think you can get it back pretty quickly, like I've said, and I guess we'll see how quickly that whole process starts. But this is the interesting spot for me on the calendar, because I still want to guard people against the notion that, like, something could be imminent with Jonas Hayes, because frankly there's no point. It would put a reduced staff into real strain to put it together, be interim staff. Louisiana did with Bob Marlin last year. I forget exactly when that was, but Georgia State faced an interim coach in conference play when the Cajuns came to Atlanta. So it is within the realm of possibility, but there's a lot of moving parts there. I think if you get, like, blown out of the building against Kennesaw, the conversations could start in earnest, because there's two sides of it. It is asking a lot of the players sticking around, the coaches sticking around, but it's also, you're not saving any money by doing it later. At this point, it's just that you can't make a hire until March, so there's no point to it, and also it makes everything harder for the day-to-day for the program sticking around. But there will come a point where you're one win, you haven't beat a D1 team, and the scores are just so poor, and this would be third straight loss to Kennesaw, possibly a big blowout. If it goes as badly as it could be a blowout likes of what you saw when you went to South Dakota State. The conversation could start for real, and you could see something, because you will have a whole week between this game and the Jacksonville State home game on the 13th. So I'm not projecting anything. I'm not reporting anything. I'm just looking at the calendar, looking at the way things have gone, and saying that this feels like the first time since we've started having these notions that it could realistically happen. Because you weren't going to do it in between Brookings and Cancun. They're all traveling together. Like, that's just not a feasible time to do an interim situation. They got back here from Cancun, didn't have that much time before they're in game prep mode for Mercer. But I think, depending on how bad it goes on Saturday, which I think we're both expecting bad just because we haven't seen any reason outside of this first half to think otherwise, maybe we're having the emergency pod type situation in the next week or so. Just getting out ahead of it. Could be nothing, could be we're talking about this whenever, but man, it is getting hard to have the same conversation over and over and over again.
And you and I are getting very good at stretching out the same conversation over and over again.
We're going nearly as long as we're in the signing class here. We're talking about a bad basketball game.
Oh man, what has befallen our lovely Georgia State University?
The last thing to talk on as far as games in the docket, and this is, we haven't talked about the women's team for a while because they've been idle for a while. They finished their Thanksgiving tournament, went 2-0 to start, and then basically like everybody else did in this little tournament, 4-team tournament, Central Arkansas was the better team on the Wednesday of that week. They won 70 to 51 to sweep the week for the Bears. I believe they're called the Bears. And Georgia State hasn't played since then, but they do have a well-scheduled road trip, if I can call it that, because this Friday they will play at FIU before playing at Miami on Sunday. So extended little trip down to, not South Beach, because neither FIU or Miami are actually that particularly close to Miami proper, but basically a little road stand. You're not going to, probably not going to stay in two different places there. You're not obviously going to commute back to Atlanta between those two games. So a weekend where you're going to get to lock in on two games and kind of, and not like a tournament, but something in between a tournament, like a Sun Belt tournament setting, and not a home setting where you're playing in your own friendly confines. So nice that geographically that could work out for them. And so FIU probably less of a stretch than Miami to win, but you hope for a split here maybe. And then Kennesaw at home next Sunday, and then conference play.
Conference play that, this is the one sports team at Georgia State right now where we actually feel relatively confident in their abilities to, do some damage in conference play. I'm not sure that they're going to be, a world beater or anything like that. I think they still have some of the issues that we talked about last year, but they still seem like a team that is at least capable of, putting points in the basket, playing good defense, the continuity that we've talked about all year with the people who came back. Crystal Henderson is obviously having a pretty good season. So a lot of what we need to see from the women is just cleaning up some of the stuff that's been their issue for the last couple of years. It's the rebounds, it's, the sloppy turnovers, not even the quantity of turnovers. It's kind of the timing of the turnovers. I feel like the third quarter kind of gets them a lot, and they've been fortunate enough to be able to come back in a couple of fourth quarters this year. That is how they ended up beating Stony Brook, but you shouldn't have to have a quarter where you have to come back like that.
You don't want to bank on that.
Exactly.
Because there are going to be games that doesn't happen. You can't do it. You're
exactly.
just too much of a task.
And I know that they started off relatively slow against Central Arkansas, but again, outscored by 13 in that game. That can be your ball game sometimes. So it wasn't specifically in this one, but they're just going to have to find a way to be a little bit more consistent coming out of halftime and reduce some of the things that have been ailing them in that third quarter, because it's been frustrating because they get to the end of the quarter and you're like, okay, like that was great, like where was this in the beginning of the quarter? And then they get to the fourth quarter and they kind of carry that over. So you're just like, are we just like not waking up during the first like 5 minutes or the first few minutes of the third quarter? Like what is happening here? So
still a couple weeks now, non-con to kind of tinker with the rotations for Gene Hill and see if that is it, and just kind of finding the right group to ride that energy out of the break. Give a little more insight on FIU. Miami's the second game, and look, they've won a game against a power conference team every year, but that is certainly the reach of this trip. Miami, good women's basketball team this year. FIU 3-3. They've got losses to South Florida, Central Florida, and at Jacksonville. They beat Bethune-Cookman, and they hosted their own sort of tournament after Thanksgiving. So they did the other thing in Georgia State. They did it after, not before. And they had wins over UMBC and Seattle, so they enter this 3-3. So don't really know how to handicap it, but certainly a winnable road game, and certainly if they're able to get the turnovers going in their way and kind of rely on Crystal Henderson to run things, kind of steer the ship in the right direction, you're hoping for that one for sure. Keep the 500 vibes going at least heading into the Kennesaw game next week. Also want to circle back there. Trying to do a better job. Basketball, we have less of a flow of kind of situating like who the opponent is, giving a little bit of... We've got a lot more, because of the way we do football, the preview's more segmented. We have a lot of that we hit off the gate. So quickly we'll circle back to men's basketball just to say that the Kennesaw State men's team, coached by Antoine Petway, they're 6-2 heading into this game. They just beat Jackson State at home on Tuesday. The lowest point total they have scored in the game this season is the 83 they scored in a loss to Oral Roberts back in their MTE on the Thanksgiving week. Just to put into perspective that this is a team that moves it quick, run the 11th quickest tempo in the country, scores a lot of points, and so that is where my cause for concern is for the men's team. Is while we thought maybe at the beginning of the year this was a team that's going to handle defense a lot better, been struggling in that regard the last couple of weeks, and Mercer caught them with some tempo. South Dakota State certainly caught them in transition a lot, and so that is my concerning. That's like the circle 5 times with red Sharpie issue heading into this one, where that's why it's hard to project, because we saw it for a half against Mercer. But if the shots stop falling in this one, if they have a 7-minute scoreless stretch in this one,
that's
good
over.
Night.
Yeah, Kennesaw State is averaging 95 a game. They've got 4 of their regulars shooting over 40% from 3. And, I maintain, the 3-point shot is not really the issue for Georgia State, because everybody's running a track meet to the rim and just, finding their shot on the inside, which is absolutely what Kennesaw State is going to want to do here. So, yeah, it's probably not going to be fun if you're a Panther.
Also a top 25 offensive rebounding team, and Georgia State, that is one of their lower statistics, one of the worst at giving up offensive rebounds. Not a great rebounding team themselves on the offensive glass, so all of this to round out the basketball talk, just a little extra splash of the don't get your hopes up too much, although I will say this, that I don't project it. I think it's likely. We're still kind of squinting to see what the best chance for this team to win against a Division I team this year. It's not going to necessarily turn his tenure around, because I feel like we're past that point. Just kind of when it happens, it happens. If they were able to win against Mercer, if they're able to find a way to win this one, it would salvage something. I think Georgia State fans would not want to suddenly have him stay around for 5 more years and sign an extension, but there's a certain pride, like talking about putting the billboards, we run this state type stuff. If you're able to find a way in this one, even if it is kind of a mirage for the season as a whole, I certainly think you'd find people that were willing to celebrate that, because anyone's looking for anything, listening to this podcast, celebrate Georgia State basketball for how poorly it has gone, but that win especially, it would certainly be a day to remember this team by that's not necessarily as bad. And you look at it, they lost, it was a neutral site, but they lost to Oral Roberts. That's not a great team. They're 290 on Ken Palm, which is better than Georgia State, but not a lot better. So if you catch them on a night where you're able to shoot it well enough and you find a way to, I'm already throwing so much hypotheticals on this and adding conditions that none of them have been Georgia State's strong suit, but I'm just saying, if the basketball gods aligned, I think it would be one last bright spot on this tenure that has not gone well, and it certainly would be something where at least you can row back in a in-state rivalry that hasn't been there that many years. They've just brought the series back, and it has not gone Georgia State's way once. So you got to fight back in that regard in some way, sometime soon. And I think the series is going to stick around, but now would be a good time to maybe try and get people feeling a little bit better, even if it doesn't save everything.
Georgia State athletics has taken some lumps against in-state teams of all sizes over the last couple of years. It has not been a particularly fun time to be a Panther if you're facing teams from the state of Georgia. So, at some point the good times will roll in again, but probably not at this one.
Yeah, and the extra salt in the wound is this game was scheduled for Friday night. It is now being played on Saturday afternoon because Kennesaw State is playing in the football conference title game for Conference USA on Friday, and they asked for the date to be moved. So, especially I'm sure their sports comm staff, breathe a sigh of relief that you're not double booked for that night for that. Those people work hard, work themselves to death, and being in 2 places at once is not in their skill set, so I'm sure they're appreciative. I know it rankled some Georgia State people, but it's look, what are you going to do? Say no to that request for no reason? It's not that deep a rivalry. If this was decades and decades of hate, Ohio State might say no to that for Michigan, but you're not there to that point. But it also means I won't be there because Friday was a great day for me and Saturday doesn't line up. So I don't know. Poll at home, is that a good thing or a bad thing? We'll talk about it next episode.
Hey, if Georgia State, is upset about it, make a conference championship game in football, and then you can talk about it.
Yeah, that is true. That is your response to that.
Kennesaw made one before you did.
This is about the time in the schedule that that game will crop up a lot because it's going to be in the non-con. They're going to want to schedule it sometime near the start of conference play. It's a good out of the Thanksgiving break, so it's been about the time of year this game happened each of the last 2 years. So just keep putting it on that Friday and keep hoping because that's when the Sun Belt does their title games as well. Maybe that's you're manifesting. That's what you can say. You're manifesting that day to come by booking a basketball game on that day.
That's how it'll be. 2026, they're going to shock the world.
Yeah, the Reddit day is past, so I guess they're going to see if there's a new Georgia State National Championship Reddit day. Don't know if anyone is online enough to still know what I'm talking about there, but we'll leave it there for now. I'll pretend you are. Pretend you know what I'm talking about. But still some stuff we could dip into. Some coaching stuff came up. Bob Chesney going to UCLA when the season's done. Obviously, this weekend we will see if they make the college football playoff. It is still a live possibility. they win against Troy in the Sun Belt title game, if Duke beats UVA in the ACC title game, it is pretty likely that both JMU and the American champion will be the last two automatic qualifying conference champions for the CFP, which would certainly be a moment for the Sun Belt. It would be the first time that happens. So we will, along with the Georgia State stuff that's on our docket, these games we just went through, we'll cover all of that, like what happened there, and kind of discuss Georgia State's just the perspective on what happens with the Sun Belt there, with the rest of the coaching news that comes up, and obviously there might be some more of that on Georgia State's front. So we will be here to talk about all of that and more on the next episode of Georgia State of the Thursday Night Podcast. Thanks for listening, and if you listen to this, if you listen to the last two, which were two of our better performing podcasts, the last two, the post-game-ish after Troy and the post-game show after Old Dominion, hit subscribe, hit like, leave some comments. All of that helps us, and we do sometimes schedule these podcasts to release at a certain time just based on when we record it, but down the line there might be times where we get a podcast out as soon as possible. We do that a lot with the post-game show, so if you are not subscribed, you're not going to be finding out that gets posted right when it's posted. So that's your reason to subscribe. Obviously, like and comment stuff also helps us out, get into the algorithm more. And as I wrap up my attempt to self-market, which is not my strong suit, I will leave the pod there. If you've made it this far in this season, we certainly appreciate you. We hope you enjoyed the coverage there of the signing day stuff with Ben Moore, basketball stuff, as much as you can enjoy that. And we will be back for more of it next time. We signed up for the lot. 12 rounds, we're still going. Thank you for listening.